this is Xiting, welcoming you to Backstage, the life behind the music. This is an online series of conversations with pianists, an exploration of their remarkable artistic lives as performers, teachers, and advocates for music. Through talking with them, I hope to shed some light on their process, as well as their backgrounds, what has led them to this point in their careers. I hope to get a glimpse into the special worlds they inhabit and illuminate some of their music making, the work that takes place before they or their students step out onto the stage. Please join me. Thank you so much, Professor Duggan, for agreeing to do the interview with me. I'm very excited to get to know more about you. So I think I would like to start our today's interview by asking you about Bach. You are a famous Bach interpreter, a concert pianist, and you performed all of Bach's music in a very short succession of time. I heard it was over 5 weeks. You played all Bach's music.
All of the keyboard, the Clavier music that was originally written for the harpsichord or the clavichords. So it didn't include arrangements and that kind of thing.
I see.
So, but yeah, it turned out to be a series of 16 concerts. And I did, well, when I was on tour with it, I did it 8 times in 2000, in the year 2000. And in most of those places, it was 3 concerts a week for 5 weeks. So that was 15. And but there were a couple of times when I only had 4 weeks to do it. So then I had to do a different concert every other night. So that was kind of a challenge. But overall, I gave more than 120 concerts that year. So it was really quite an experience to do that.
Yeah, that's very impressive. How do you retain so much music? Does it after a while just sort of become a language of its own? You're kind of able to speak that language?
Well, fortunately, I've been a Bach freak since I was very young. I started piano when I was 10, and I discovered my love of Bach when I was 11. So ever since then, I've always wanted to learn everything I could get my hands on written by Bach. So when I was in high school, I learned all of the inventions and symphonias and all of the well-tempered clavier and some of the larger single works too, like the Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue and that kind of thing. So and I learned a few suites, but I was more of a Prelude and Fugue type person when I was in high school. The suites I learned a little bit later. So when you're younger, you can retain things more, and then I find later on, the younger that you learned them, the easier they come back to you. So things that I learned and memorized when I was in high school, I can resurrect those pieces easier than pieces that I memorized and played last year. So it's just something about being young, I guess. But I learned a lot of Bach when I was young, so I was able to retain it that way. And so a lot of that music I played from memory. There were some of the newer things that I had learned before the tour, especially very early works of Bach that are not played very often, that I use music for. So it wasn't all completely memorized, but a lot of it was.
Mhm. When you were 11, what was it about Bach's music that caught your attention?
Well, let me think. My teacher back then, I went to a lesson and she said, I want to play this piece for you. So she played the F major 2-part invention for me. And I just said to her, I have to learn that. And so I learned it for the next lesson. And I caught on right away to what I love about Bach's music so much, and that is that it's endlessly interesting. what he does compositionally, but then the music has such a joy and life in it, and an expressivity and a rhythm. And I feel like very often there's this feeling of once it starts, it just has to keep driving on to get to the end. There's a kind of motion
Mm.
that starts and it just goes straight to the end. And there was just something I found that was so interesting and so fun. I thought it was a lot of fun to play and to figure out, and just so much joy in it. And I've felt that way about Bach's music ever since. But I discovered that when that first time when she played that two-part invention for me.
Yeah. I don't think a lot of 11-year-olds would agree with you.
Yeah,
But
I don't
yeah,
know. I don't really know why exactly. But it just there was just something about it was just a joy that I felt in his music that I think is unique. I mean, I think a lot of the only other composer I felt like that about when I was a kid was Mozart,
mm,
and for very
definitely.
similar kinds of reasons.
Yeah.
It was music that was full of this wonderful um, joy and life that kind of lifts you up. Even though
Mhm.
it expresses a lot of different emotions and everything, it never drags you down. It never leaves you feeling depressed. It always makes you feel like, the wonder of life, kind of like.
Yeah, definitely. When I was a kid, I loved Chopin's music. I still do. I think that has something to do with I left home at a very young age, and I think the experience is similar to Chopin, and then I kind of feel kind of like a affinity with his music. I think that's probably what you had, a kind of spark of an affinity with Bach's music like that.
Yeah, I think so. It's just there's something that's communicated by Bach's music that is just very, very special. It's a real balance, I think, between head and heart. I
Yeah,
mean, head wise, there's no other music that's put together like that.
yeah.
It's just so ingenious what he was able to do from just an intellectual perspective. But then all of the emotion and everything going on underneath all of that and through all that, to me, is just such a wonderful balance. And
Mhm.
I still find that that music has it that way more than any other music that I know and love.
When did you decide to take on the project of playing all his keyboard music?
Well, it's something that I always wanted to do, but then when the year 2000 was coming up, sort of around the mid 1990s, I guess, I thought, well, that's going to be the 250th anniversary of Bach's death. So it's going to be a major Bach year. It's going to be the turn of the millennium.
Mm.
And in the Catholic Church, of which I'm a priest, uh, it was considered to be a jubilee year because of the turn of the millennium. So the Pope back then, Pope John Paul II, was constantly talking about the year 2000, and he wrote something called a document called "On the Threshold of Hope." So I decided if I wanted to do this, that I would call it Bach on the Threshold of Hope. And so I talked to my abbot about it. He's my religious superior, and he was enthusiastic about the idea. So that's how it all came about.
When you first finished your first complete performance of the whole box keyboard music, what did you learn from it? What did you get from that experience?
Well, the way I had set it up was sort of in chronological order.
Mhm.
So the first three concerts were all early pieces that he had written in his more youthful period. And then it went ahead into, I called it the years of early maturity and then the years of later maturity. Um, And so the main thing that I learned and experienced from doing it that way was kind of walking through his whole growth as a musician and a composer. Some of his early works are very imitative of other composers of his time. Um, and he had a tendency to ramble a little bit in his earlier works. So as he went along and became more mature, he kind of whittled down his musical language so that it became more and more uh, 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 kind of that every note meant something. You know, it wasn't just written to show off or impress,
Mhm.
which you kind of get that feeling sometimes from some of his very, very early works. And he also was able then to appropriate the musical language that he learned in his youthful works and really came into his own and found his own very unique voice as a composer. And so going through all the works that way in chronological order really taught me a lot about how he moved from youth to through his main years of maturity, and then at the end these transcendental kinds of pieces that he wrote in the last decade of his life.
Mhm. What would you say those pieces are, the last decade of his life? The
Well, the second book of the Well-Tempered Clavier, the Art of Fugue,
mm,
um, uh, some of the other pieces like the Goldberg Variations, those pieces that he wrote uh, in the last decade of his life are just they're so I don't know any other word that explains it better except transcendental.
yeah, yeah. A lot of people when they play Bach, they kind of play it like they are worshiping something, and then it's so sacred that they're afraid to make any adjustment, and then they also don't use any pedal. What are your takes on that? Your perspective on that?
Well, uh, I think a lot of it depends on the instrument that we're playing. Um, and I think that we have to be true to each instrument. So certainly when you're playing the harpsichord, there's no damper pedal on the harpsichord. So, and there's also no finger dynamics. So you have to use other means that are specific to the harpsichord to express the music. When we play it on the modern concert grand piano, I think we have to be mindful that that it was written for a different instrument, or at least a more primitive form of the piano, because Bach actually did know the early forte piano and was actually the selling agent of it in the last years of his life in Leipzig. So these harpsichord purists that say that you should never play Bach on the piano, it should only be on the harpsichord, are wrong even from an historical perspective. But of course, that was a very different instrument from our modern concert grand. So I think we need to use the resources of the modern concert grand in order to express the music, because otherwise, then the music is too dry, or the modern concert grand is not nearly as inherently a colorful instrument as, say, the harpsichord or even the organ.
Mhm.
So I think we have to keep that in mind and use the resources of the piano for the music, but also keeping in mind uh, that it wasn't written for this instrument. And so there's a certain boundary. There are certain boundaries I think that we have to honor, especially stylistic boundaries that we have to honor when we play the music on the piano. But I think the piano without the pedal is like a soulless instrument. That's my own personal opinion. So I think rather than say, you know, either use pedal or not use pedal, the question more is, how do we use the pedal in Bach?
Mhm.
what are the boundaries of using the pedal in Bach. So, but I think that we should definitely use it. I think a lot of times it's kind of a it's sort of like uh, well, we don't want to deal with the problem of pedaling in Bach, so we'll just say let's not use it at all. So I think it's kind of a cop out in a way, because pedaling in Bach is very complex. I mean, you have to be very careful, that it doesn't blur melodic lines, uh, but it can be used for color, and it can also be used to build up sound for pieces that are mainly harmonically constructed, say like the first prelude of the Well-tempered Clavier, and the arpeggiated passages in the Chromatic Fantasy and Fugue. Those kinds of things can really benefit color-wise and sustain-wise. A lot of times when you listen to harpsichordists play, they hold down notes
Mhm.
longer than what's notated because that's part of the style. So I think on the piano we can use the pedal to do that a lot of times. And we can also use the pedal if we decide that we want something to be legato that is not, that we can't do legato unless we use the pedal. But we have to use it very judiciously, and it's a difficult thing to teach to pedal correctly in Bach, I find. But
Yeah.
I think we need to teach it, and we need to know how to do it.
Yes. You mentioned teaching Bach. I was wondering, what are some of the main principles you use when you're teaching pianists, your students, when they're studying Bach's music?
Well, I think there are a number of different levels, So I think there's the level of just finding out the best way to realize it on the keyboard in terms of fingering, in terms of hand distribution, uh, and not to mention just things that are basic to any music, like evenness and tempo and all those kinds of things. So I think usually what I do is uh, I start with analysis, first of all, of how to negotiate the notes, fingering wise. And that's a really tricky thing because I think that students should have a fingered edition. Uh, but then I think uh, they should regard the fingering as a suggestion that they should try out, but then that there are other possibilities that they can try out too. And lots of fingering in these editions are very twisty and stretchy and that kind of thing. They use a lot of finger substitution. And
Yeah.
so, you have to kind of, it's a good place to start from, I think,
Mhm.
to have a suggested fingering,
Mhm.
but then to make decisions about that. And then the next level is a level of analysis, of knowing, what the structure of the music is. One of the things that we need to do as performers is to make that structure lucid to a listening audience. So I think we have to be aware of that in order to project that, the clarity of that in our playing. So there's the analysis, and there's the usual analysis of fugues, where you find where all the subjects are and the permutations of those subjects, if there are any, and where episodes are, that are linking the entrances of the subject. Those things, to understand that, is very, very important. Even in the inventions, it's important to deal with that. In the dance music, it's very important to know uh, what alemans and courants and jigs are, and how what kind of mood and style those movements have. So there's all that, and then finally, it's arriving at a way of being the most expressive and even emotional that we can within the parameters of that style.
Mhm.
But it's definitely very emotional music, and so I think that's sort of the icing on the cake. And I don't think we can stop with just analysis. I think we also have to, go inside ourselves and try to first of all be aware of how this music affects us, and then how can we project that so that it will affect the
Mm-hmm.
listeners as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes. You mentioned that you're kind of a prelude and fugue aficionado. I was wondering if you could pick one of your favorites from the two books and then talk about it in depth. I would love to see how you think about the music.
Well, I have a couple of possibilities, but I'll just pick one.
Okay.
Um, if I had to, I mean, it's really hard to say, which one of the preludes and fugues is my favorite, because each one inhabits its own world, its own
Yeah.
mode of expression, which I wouldn't want to do without any of them.
Mm-hmm.
But I think probably the B flat minor of Book Two of the Well-Tempered Clavier, which is number 22.
Okay.
Yeah, if I were pressed, I think I would probably say that that's my favorite. It was written, within the last decade of Bach's life. So in during that period, he was very much pushing the boundaries of contrapuntal expression and complexity to their furthest extent. And so I think this particular prelude and fugue does that, but in a way which is very dramatic and almost romantic. So it's sort of represents to me the height of contrapuntal writing, which finds its highest expression, I believe, in the art of fugue. But a lot of the fugues, especially of Book Two, foreshadow that supreme achievement. Um, the prelude is very much uh, like a three-part invention, I find. So I try to approach the analysis of it from that point of view. And one thing that I think is so amazing about this is that he actually, in the counter subject that he uses, he's using the same motive that he used in the prelude, the B flat minor prelude of Book One of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So he's also kind of tying it in with this immense cycle. So I think in the prelude, it's really important to be aware of, the main subject, of course, which is this. And then this part of it, which quotes, I'm sorry, I'm out of the screen right now, but
Okay.
hopefully you can hear it, huh? Can you
Yes,
hear
I can hear it.
it? Okay, this part. That's quoting from Book One. So I want to be aware of every place in this piece where that occurs, and to find a certain kind of balance between those two things, because they're often on top of each other. Um, but the first part of that subject enters almost like a fugue throughout this, even though it's not strictly speaking a fugue. But I want to know where all those motives occur, and then I want to know where the episodes are.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I don't have measure numbers. I should have gotten an edition that has measure numbers, but maybe we don't need to get that specific. But there are a lot of places where you have just fragments of that first subject, or of that second part of the subject. It's really all one big long line, but
Mm-hmm.
it's sort of like the first half of it, and then the second half, which is the quotation from Book One.
Mm-hmm.
The other thing that I think is so important in every piece by Bach, but certainly in this prelude, is to find where the cadences are, where the main cadences are, and then to see how the music moves toward those places and resolves, and so that there's a feeling that we've arrived somewhere. Sometimes the first the first cadence very often is the dominant, and but in this particular piece, what's really interesting is that he does sort of arrive at the dominant, but then it's not long before he sort of begins over again in B flat minor. So he at this one place, he's arrived at the dominant, but he doesn't stay there very long. Again, but this time it's in the bass voice instead of the top voice. And so on. And then towards the end, there's a magnificent building up, piling up of that motive over a pedal point. Which is often what he does when he wants to, really make his final statement. And the music just soars way up to the top. First of all, he starts with a pedal point on F below middle C, but then he changes the pedal point to the F above middle C. And just the way the music rises up before it finally comes back down again at the end, I think is just such an incredible thing.
Yeah, that's very dramatic.
It's very dramatic. It's very emotional. But the way it's written, I mean, the emotion is built into the way that he's done the counterpoint. I mean, you can't really separate those two things. It's kind of like there's an emotion, there's a feeling of being overwhelmed emotionally just by what he's doing compositionally. And then when you add on that, onto that, just the beauty of the theme and the themes and the way that the music rises up to a climax and then comes back down again. I mean, all those things are just interlinked. You can't really separate them out. And then the fugue is just, it's a contrapuntal tour de force. It's one of the greatest fugues that he ever wrote from a contrapuntal point of view. It's just so amazing in his use of stretto and inversion. And it's a very insistent kind of subject that starts around the tonic, but then climbs up afterwards. So there's two parts of it. There's this part, and then he has this part that just climbs. And then when the other subject comes in, then the counter subject is something that's completely chromatic. So both of those things are important and that you find used throughout. Cadences are really important in this piece, so I have all the main cadences marked out. And then I think he's also set up the entire structure of this around the first big section uses the original subject, but then the middle section uses the inversion. And he also uses strettos with both of those things kind of separately. And then at the end, he combines both the original and the inversion together in strettos. And it's just so incredible. It's so exciting. And, it's almost hard to imagine this on a harpsichord. It's sort of like he's looking forward to, sort of like they'd say about Beethoven, that
Yeah,
Beethoven
yeah,
once, what, why should I care about your wretched instrument when the spirit seizes me? I think that that's kind of the way this fugue is. And so, I mean, at the very end, then he just ends with the original subject combined with its inversion, and all the voices join in with it. So he waits. Sorry, I haven't practiced this, so I played a wrong note. But he saves the best for last, for the very last, after all this other stuff that he's done, and it's just overwhelming. It really is.
yeah. He's definitely the Michelangelo of keyboard. He's
Oh my God, yeah. From every point of view, it's a transcendental piece. It's a work of genius that you just what can you do? You just say you're just grateful.
yeah,
Grateful to be able to listen to it, and grateful to be able to play it and to make it part of you. And so if you memorize it, it's like it becomes a part of you, and you have this beautiful creation, in you. It's such an amazing thing, music
yes.
is.
Hmm. Do you perform some of your concerts on harpsichord or organ?
Yes. Uh-huh. Well, when I'm back down at my monastery in Louisiana, I have to play the organ all the time. So I've it's sort of like when I'm up north teaching up here, I'm a pianist, and when I'm down there, I'm an organist. But I do a lot of Bach on the organ as well, the great organ works.
Mhm.
Um, but then, yeah, there are times when I do it on the harpsichord. Well, certainly when there's continuo, I'll use it on the harpsichord. Or recently, SUNY Fredonia, my school, just purchased a new continuo organ that we just debuted last month. So I do a lot of that. But in some Bach festivals, they want harpsichord, and so then I'll go ahead and play it on the harpsichord too. And it's fascinating because, like I was talking about before, it's a different medium, and so you have to, it's the same piece of music, but in some ways it's not when it's on a different instrument, because the different instrument brings out different aspects. Every instrument brings out different aspects of the same music. And I think that's why Bach was into transcription so much,
Mhm.
that each instrument could shed its own light
Yeah,
on on a single piece of music.
yeah. I think it's like a different canvas, different tools that you have. Yeah.
Yeah.
Um, I know you have studied for many years the Taubman technique. I was watching some of your performance on YouTube, and you seem very integrated as a pianist. I was wondering, can you describe what the Taubman technique has done for your playing, and why do you think it's valuable?
Well, in a nutshell, the Taubman approach is mainly about moving in a coordinated and healthy way at the keyboard. We know that there are some hazards in playing any instrument because of repetitive stress syndrome that can creep in, and that's why many musicians are prey to things like carpal tunnel syndrome or tendonitis and these kinds of things. And we know that great artists have sometimes suffered from these things too. So it's very important for us to be able to move in the most coordinate and effective and free way, so that we're not tense and that we're not making demands on our muscles and on our bodies that can harm them. So the Taubman approach does that, but it does a lot more than that. It really, in order for that to happen, it it analyzes kind of almost in a scientific kind of way how we move, how what the piano does, mechanically,
Mhm.
and how we set that mechanical happening into motion by what we do with our bodies. And it involves certainly, how to move most effectively, but also how to move in order to make the best sounds,
Mhm.
and to know how to really what legato is all about, for example, uh, or how to leap most efficiently at the keyboard. Um, what are the most efficient ways to do all those things? So I was introduced to the Taubman approach because, oh gosh, what, 20 years, 25 years ago, a friend of mine, uh, I was in New Orleans, and he came down and we judged a competition, the New Orleans piano competition, together. And he gave a recital and I gave a recital. So we were at each other's recitals, but he was studying with Dorothy Taubman at the time. So he told me all about her. And then every year, the Taubman Institute would meet in Massachusetts, and for 2 weeks, and they would have performances every night. So I was invited to come and give a performance. And so that's how I got to know about all this work. And I realized that, I always thought that technical limitations were primarily due to a lack of talent. That some people were just better at it than others, and so I should just accept the fact that I have certain limitations, and just learn to live with those limitations. And the Taubman approach totally got me over and beyond that. So it really freed up uh, my playing, I think. I luckily I never had any injuries from my playing, but it really helped with passages that I had never thought I'd be able to negotiate successfully. It talked about things that no teacher had ever talked to me about before. Um, so, so it really helped my playing a lot. And then, most importantly, though, I think, is that it enabled me then to be able to teach in a way that I think imparts true knowledge to students,
Mhm.
not just opinions about, or imagining, how to move to, to make sounds or something, but something that's very specific, um, to get what you want to get from the keyboard with a minimum of effort and stress and tension, and well, no stress and no tension, and then also how to make the most beautiful sounds at the keyboard, and then how to pass those principles on. You know, some there have always been great pianists who have also been great teachers, but sometimes there have been great pianists who just kind of uh, arrived at it almost intuitively. So they weren't always able to explain exactly what they would do, or they would just tell their student, oh, just look at me and listen to me and
Yeah.
just do what I do, without really being able to describe,
Yes.
what are we really doing. And so I think the Taubman approach really helps teaching as well as playing. And I think your professor,
Yeah.
Logan Skelton, even though he doesn't advertise himself as a Taubman teacher, he teaches very much that way. He's very analytical about movements, as you know,
Yes.
and wanting to negotiate the keyboard in as free a way as possible.
Mm-hmm.
With and so you know what that's like, and there are other, Taubman's not the only one that talks about that, but I've found that Taubman's synthesis of everything related to piano technique is the most impressive synthesis that I've ever come across.
Yeah, definitely. It's a very scientific approach. It's what you said is very correct. It's not an opinion. It's very scientific.
Right. It's based on physiological and mechanical principles,
Yes.
really.
Yes. Being a very active concert pianist, you sometimes have some unusual recital programs. I think I always heard that you pair the Bach's preludes with the Chopin preludes, and sometimes the Bach Goldberg variation with the Diabelli variation. So, what are your thoughts behind those programmings?
Well, they're a little crazy, actually. I haven't done the Chopin and the Bach back to back for a long time. I'm thinking about maybe trying it again sometime. But I think Chopin was very much inspired by Bach. And I think in a lot of ways, his preludes were a kind of homage to Bach's uh, preludes and fugues in every key. So I thought that it was kind of interesting to see, when you hear them back to back, so to speak, that it's just very interesting. I mean, there are some correlations. Sometimes Chopin's are completely different from Bach's, but sometimes they're the same. I mean, obviously the first one uh, is it's it's
Figuration.
arpeggiated,
Yeah.
mainly harmonic, right? And there are some other interesting parallels between the preludes of both composers, I think.
Mhm.
Um, as far as the Goldbergs and the Diabellis, putting those together on a program,
Mhm.
I think that those are the two, and probably everybody agrees that those are the two great monuments of the variation form written for the keyboard. And the question has always been, did Beethoven know the Goldberg variations? And we don't really know the answer to that. But if if he didn't know them, I think there are some amazing coincidences then that we have to talk about in terms of compositional process and the overall structure. Now, it's true that the Diabellis don't have as tight an overall structure
Mhm.
as the Goldberg variations do, but there are some real parallels. I think there's both sets have a real decided midpoint where you kind of arrive somewhere in the middle, and then you start the next part of the journey. And I think
Mhm.
that definitely happens in both of them. Um, there's a lot of counterpoint in the Diabelli variations. Since it's a late work, we know that Beethoven was he was just so taken. He was completely immersed in counterpoint in his last period. So there's a lot of that, and so a lot of that reminds one of Bach.
Mhm.
But also the trilogy of C minor variations before the great climax at the end is very similarly placed to the great minor variation 25 in the Goldberg variations. So I think there are some amazing parallels between the two, and performing them and listening to them one after the other, even though it's kind of taxing. I think you have to leave the repeats out of the Bach when you do that. The Beethoven, you can't leave the repeats out. I don't believe. But with Bach, you can leave the repeats out, and I think it makes a kind of a very exciting and satisfying listening experience to hear both of those side by side.
What are some other projects such as like Shostakovich preludes? Have you ever wanted to do that? Play them back
I've
to back.
wanted to, but I've never done it. At least not yet. I really I've played a couple of Shostakovich's Preludes and Fugues, but I've never uh, taken on the whole cycle or even part of the cycle. And I think maybe that's something that hopefully I can delve into more in the future. But that would be a nice project. Now, sometimes, a few times I've had students that play a prelude and fugue from the Well Tempered and then play the same key in the Shostakovich.
Mhm.
And that's always very interesting to do that because sometimes there are correlations there as
Mm,
well.
yeah.
So yeah, so maybe that's a possibility. Uh, Another possibility would be uh, to play uh, just assemble a kind of program where pieces that are obviously indebted to Bach can be all in one program.
Mm.
That's something that I've toyed around with a little bit. So I don't know. I've also done projects before where I've done the first half on the piano and the second half on the harpsichord.
Mm.
Um, it's been a long time since I've done that. Maybe I could do that again. That's always an interesting thing to do.
That's all sounds very interesting. Well, thank you so much for talking with me today. This has been very inspiring and informative to talk to you about Bach. And I look forward to hearing you in person someday.
Well, thank you, Shiting, and your performance of the WC and your final project was just really, really fine. Congratulations on such beautiful, beautiful playing.
Thank you. Thank you. All right. Please take care.
You too. Thank you so much.